Russia's war on Ukraine will cost $2.8 trillion across the world, and winter energy shortages in Europe could push that figure higher, OECD says. Russia's invasion of Ukraine will cost $2.8 trillion in lower economic output by the end of 2023, the OECD says. The Paris-based group added that amount could climb depending on how Europe's energy crisis unfolds. "We are paying a very hefty price for the war," OECD's chief economist said, per Wall Street Journal. Russia's war on Ukraine will cost the world $2.8 trillion, and that figure could go higher if Europe's energy crisis worsens to the point of rationing over the winter months, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Since the invasion in February, the conflict has become the worst that's been seen in Europe since World War II, and the ensuing surge in natural gas and power prices have rattled economies and strained global supply chains. "We are paying a very hefty price for the war," Álvaro Santos Pereira, OECD's acting chief economist, said, per the Wall Street Journal. The OECD forecasted Monday that the world economy would grow by 3% in 2022, and 2.2% in 2023. That's a revised forecast, down from 4.5% and 3.2% for this and next year, respectively. In the Eurozone specifically, the OECD's June forecast was a 1.6% growth in 2023. Monday's revision dropped that down to 0.3%. In Germany, Europe's largest economy, the figure revised from 1.7% growth to a 0.7% contraction. And all these figures could worsen if a severe winter exacerbates Europe's energy crisis, the Paris-based economic group said. A rise in energy prices would weigh on Europe's economic output so that it would be 1.3% lower in 2023, with the world economy growing at a 1.7% clip. An energy shortage across Europe could prompt a rationing of supplies as winter is particularly harsh. That risk could be somewhat minimized, the OECD said, if energy consumption was slashed by up to 15%. "If you want to save energy, higher prices mean less consumption," he said, per the Journal. Meanwhile, Germany signed a natural gas deal with the UAE on Sunday, marking another move by a European country to secure additional energy supplies ahead of winter. This marks an important milestone in building up an LNG supply infrastructure in Germany and setting up a more diversified gas supply, Germany utility giant RWE said about the agreement. As Russia continues its military assault on Ukraine, the heavy toll on the Russian economy could be felt for years to come. The invasion is now in its third month, and sustaining it requires approximately $900 million a day, Sean Spoons, editor-in-chief of Sofrep, a media outlet focused on military news, told Newsweek. Several factors play into that heavy price, according to Sofrep's estimate. That includes paying the Russian soldiers who are fighting in Ukraine, providing them with munitions, bullets and rockets, and the cost to repair lost or damaged military equipment. Russia also must pay for the thousands of critical weapons and cruise missiles that have been used during the war, which run about $1.5 million apiece, according to Spoons. Those figures don't take into consideration how much Russia may have lost financially because of the severe economic sanctions imposed on it after launching the invasion in late February. Those sanctions may remain in place even if Russia withdraws its troops, according to the White House. Many observers believed Russia would quickly rout Ukraine soon after the invasion, given its military superiority. However, Russia has not had much military success up to this point. Its forces have failed to take control of the capital city of Kyiv and struggled in other major cities. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby has pointed out that every move by Russia's forces has been met with strong resistance by the Ukrainians. All I can tell you is that the Russians have not made the kind of progress in the Donbas and the south that we believe they wanted to make. We do believe they're behind schedule, Kirby said. The embattled Donbas region in eastern Ukraine contains two territories, Donetsk and Luhansk, occupied by pro-Russian separatists. Russia's failures come at a great cost, both financially and in terms of loss of life, although the Kremlin has been reluctant to release numbers about military casualties. Direct losses from the war have cost Russia about $7 billion, according to the consultancy Savita. The economic sanctions imposed on the country as a result of the invasion have had devastating impacts on the country, which are likely to be felt by Russian citizens for decades to come, according to a March 14 CNBC report. The Institute of International Finance, a financial think tank representing companies in over 70 countries, said the country's gross domestic product will likely fall by 15% this year, according to Business Insider. The Institute of International Finance, a financial think tank representing companies in over 70 countries, said the country's gross domestic product will likely fall by 15% this year, according to Business Insider. Ukraine dealt a major blow to Russia in April with the sinking of the Moskva, a Russian warship and the Navy's flagship. It was an estimated $750 million loss, according to Forbes Ukraine. The publication reported in April that Ukraine has destroyed more than 5,000 pieces of Russian equipment since the war began, but that the Moskva was by far the most costly target. Despite Russian weaponry's massive costs, Kirby said there is evidence that Russian forces have not been hitting their intended targets with precision-guided missiles. He said a multitude of factors could be responsible, including operator incompetence. Ukraine is also facing a heavy economic cost because of Russia's invasion. The cost of war: the Russia-Ukraine war costs $8.9 trillion after 5 months. Russian President Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine has the heavy cost of $8.9 trillion conservatively, a loss equivalent to more than 4 times the entire annual income of all Canadians. The estimates include human costs of $4.7 trillion, concentrated in Ukraine, but affecting people worldwide as the impacts of the war spread, according to a new report from the C.D. Howe Institute. The author draws on available estimates of the value of a statistical life, VSL, and by derivation of a statistical life year, VSLY, to provide a sense of the scale of the rarely quantified human costs, which include the toll of dead and wounded, the effect of war trauma in Ukraine, and the spillover effects on third parties, which include the tipping of tens of millions in sub-Saharan Africa into extreme hunger, the heightened stress posed by the threat of nuclear war, and the shared or vicarious trauma visited on individuals worldwide in this, the first social media war. Arriving at the total of $8.9 trillion as a conservative estimate, Ciuriak explains that this figure is comprised of about $4.25 trillion in economic costs and $4.7 trillion in human costs, of which $3.5 trillion is the long-term cost to the world in terms of life-shortening war-induced trauma. This study confirms what is often stated rhetorically, that the human costs are indeed greater than the strictly economic damage, says Ciuriak. Examining the economic spillover costs of the war on third parties, based on forecast revisions by the International Monetary Fund that reflect the impact of the war, Ciuriak attributes a total 1.55% short-term hit to global GDP from the war, or about $1.55 trillion. Ciuriak emphasizes the significance of the flight of global capital and Russia's own young technology entrepreneurs for the value of Russia's intangible assets, while also pointing out that the current economic era is one of intangibles. He estimates that around $260 billion worth of Russia's intangible assets were destroyed. Analyzing the economic effects of the war on third parties based on updated forecasts from as of 5 months, the estimated cost of the physical damage to Ukraine's commercial and civilian infrastructure is likely around $180 billion, and that cost is increasing every week. Additionally, it is estimated that the aggregate loss of output for the economies of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine over the medium term will be $2.2 trillion at 2022 prices in present value terms. He also highlights 3 important non-quantified impacts. The loss of the peace dividend as the need to rearm is impressed upon governments confronted with the reality that the mechanized destruction of 20th century wars is unfortunately still with us. 2. How finding alternative sources of energy to Russia's oil and gas has meant the restarting of coal-fired energy plants, resulting in a costly delay in addressing the escalating cost of climate change, and 3.